The distress signal had been broadcasting for 6 standard cycles when the Galactic Council's emergency response team finally detected it. The message was weak, fragmented, but unmistakably desperate. It came from the remote mining colony of Kepler 438b, a small settlement on the edge of Council space where the Zilani had been peacefully extracting rare minerals for decades. Commander Thektar of the Council Emergency Response Division studied the decoded message with growing concern. The Zilani were known throughout the galaxy as gentle herbivores, devoted to their families and their work. They had never caused trouble for anyone, never engaged in conflict, and certainly never faced anything that would require military intervention. "What do we know about their situation?" Thektar asked his communications officer, a tall Vraxian whose blue skin flickered with patterns of worry. "The transmission is badly damaged, sir. We can make out references to raiders, taken our young, and something about death ships circling. The colony's population is approximately 12,000 Zilani civilians, including 3,000 younglings." Thektar's 4 eyes narrowed. Raiders attacking a peaceful mining colony was exactly the kind of crisis the Emergency Response Division was designed to handle. "Prep the relief fleet, medical supplies, food, temporary shelters, and a security detail of 500 troops. We can be there in 4 days." "Sir," the communications officer hesitated. "There's something else. The signal contains an automatic forward request to Earth." "Earth?" Thektar was surprised. The humans had only joined the Galactic Council 18 cycles ago, and while they had proven themselves capable during their brief membership, they were still considered newcomers. Why would the Zilani contact the humans? "Unknown, sir. Perhaps they had some prior trading relationship?" Thektar dismissed the thought. Whatever the reason, it hardly mattered. By the time any human response could reach Kepler 438b, the Council's relief fleet would already have the situation well in hand. Humans were enthusiastic enough, but they lacked the experience and resources for major humanitarian operations. Meanwhile, 3 sectors away, the human deep space monitoring station Prometheus was picking up the same distress signal. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen was on duty when the automated systems flagged the transmission as a Code 7 emergency. "Ma'am," called out Ensign Rodriguez from his station, "we're receiving a distress call from Kepler 438b. "It's pretty bad." Chen moved to his station, her expression growing darker as she listened to the enhanced audio. The Zilani voices were filled with terror, describing ships that had appeared without warning, aggressive boarding actions, and the systematic abduction of their youngest citizens. "How long ago was this sent?" Chen asked. "Signal degradation suggests 6 days, ma'am. But there's something else. The message specifically requests human assistance. They mention something about remembering our promise and the debt we owe." Chen frowned. She wasn't familiar with any formal agreements between Earth and the Zilani colony, but that didn't mean much. Human diplomatic and trade relationships had expanded rapidly since joining the Council. "Get me Admiral Harrison on Priority Channel, and start pulling everything we have on Kepler 438b. Within an hour, the information was flowing in. The Zilani colony had been established 37 years ago as a joint venture between their species and several other Council races. What made it special was its output of trilithium crystals, essential components for faster-than-light communication systems. The colony was also notable for something else. 5 years ago, a human cargo ship had suffered catastrophic engine failure near their system. "The Zilani saved them," Rodriguez reported, reading from the file. "The cargo ship Meridian was carrying a full load of medical supplies bound for the Tau Ceti plague outbreak. Engine explosion left them stranded with 42 crew members. The Zilani diverted 3 of their own ships, rescued everyone, and delivered the medical supplies themselves, even though it cost them 2 months of mining operations." Chen nodded slowly. She remembered the incident now. The medical supplies had been critical in containing the plague, and the 42 crew members had included several key scientists working on the cure. Did we ever formally thank them? Yes, ma'am. Captain Martinez of the Meridian apparently promised the Zalani that humans would remember their kindness and return the favor if ever needed. Admiral Harrison's face appeared on the main screen moments later, his weathered features serious. I've reviewed the situation, Commander. What's your assessment? Based on the distress call details, we're looking at systematic raiding operations targeting civilian populations with specific focus on abducting younglings. The attackers have multiple ships and are conducting organized military operations. Timeline? The signal is 6 days old, sir. If they're still in system, the situation could be deteriorating rapidly. Harrison was quiet for a long moment. What's the Council response? Standard humanitarian relief package, sir. Medical supplies, temporary shelters, and a security detail. Estimated arrival time is 4 days from now. 4 days. Harrison's voice was flat. Commander, how long would it take us to get there? Chen had been dreading this question because she knew the answer would sound crazy. If we scramble the Third Fleet immediately, 18 hours, sir. The Admiral's eyebrows rose. The Third Fleet? That's not a relief operation, Commander. That's an invasion force. Yes, sir. But if hostile forces are conducting organized raids on civilian populations, particularly targeting children? Chen let the implication hang in the air. Harrison stared at her for a long moment. The Third Fleet consisted of 12 heavy destroyers, 6 cruisers, 2 battleships, and the flagship carrier Indomitable. It was designed to project overwhelming force anywhere in human space within 24 hours. Using it for a humanitarian mission was like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Sir, Chen added quietly, the Zalani saved 42 of our people, and Captain Martinez gave them his word. Prep the fleet, Harrison said finally. Full combat loadout, but include humanitarian supplies as well. I'll handle the political fallout with the Council later. As the Third Fleet began its rapid deployment sequence, the situation on Kepler 438b was indeed deteriorating. The Korthak raiders had been systematically stripping the colony of everything valuable, but their primary focus remained on the Zalani younglings. To the Korthak, a species of aggressive reptilian traders, Zalani children represented an extremely valuable commodity in the galaxy's illegal slave markets. Elder Marintok crouched in the ruins of what had been the colony's primary school, listening to the sounds of destruction echoing through the settlement. 3 days had passed since the raiders arrived, and hope was fading quickly. The Korthak had herded most of the adult population into containment areas while they methodically searched for hidden children. Elder, whispered one of his assistants, the Council ships will arrive too late, Marintok finished sadly. The raiders work quickly. By the time help arrives, our young ones will be gone. They had managed to hide perhaps 300 children in the deep mining tunnels, but the Korthak were bringing in specialized sensors. It was only a matter of time before they were discovered. A massive explosion shook the ground above them, followed by the distinctive whine of energy weapons firing at maximum power. But something was different about these sounds. The weapons were more powerful than anything the Korthak possessed, and the explosions seemed to be moving away from the colony rather than toward it. What's happening up there? Another Zalani whispered. Marintok activated his personal communicator, trying to reach the surface. Static filled the channel, but then a voice came through, speaking accented but clear Galactic Standard. This is Admiral Harrison of the Human Space Navy to all Zalani civilians. You are now under the protection of Earth's Third Fleet. Remain in your current locations while we eliminate the hostile forces. The Zalani stared at each other in amazement. Humans? Here? It seemed impossible. Above ground, the Korthak were discovering that their easy raid had suddenly become a nightmare. The human fleet had dropped out of hyperspace with shocking precision, emerging from their jump barely 1,000 kilometers from the planet's surface. No warning, no negotiation, no demands for surrender. The lead human ship had simply begun firing. Captain Grekhar of the Korthak raider Bloodfang was trying desperately to understand what was happening. His ships were fast and well-armed by raider standards, but the human vessels were something else entirely. They moved with mechanical precision, their weapons hitting targets with impossible accuracy, and they seemed completely uninterested in typical raider tactics like hostage negotiations or ransom demands. "Captain!" his weapons officer called out. "Their lead ship is demanding our immediate surrender." "Tell them we have hostages," Grekhar snarled. "Threaten to kill the younglings if they don't withdraw." The communications officer tried to relay the message, but the human response was swift and uncompromising. "This is Admiral Harrison. You have 10 seconds to release all hostages and surrender your vessels. Any harm to civilians will result in the immediate destruction of your entire fleet. This is your only warning." Grekhar laughed harshly. 10 seconds? These humans are insane. Show them we mean business. Execute 5 of the younglings and broadcast it. But before his orders could be carried out, the Bloodfang shuddered under massive weapons impact. Every raider ship in the system was being simultaneously engaged by human forces that seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. The humans weren't just attacking. They were systematically dismantling the raider fleet with surgical precision. "How many ships do they have?" Grekhar demanded. "Sensors show 20 ships, Captain, all heavily armed. They're not trying to capture us, sir. They're trying to destroy us completely." Through the chaos of battle, Admiral Harrison's voice continued to broadcast on all frequencies. "Zalani civilians, remain in secure positions. All Korthak vessels, surrender immediately or be destroyed. There will be no negotiations while civilians remain in danger." The human assault was unlike anything the raiders had ever encountered, where most species would have attempted to negotiate, demanded explanations, or tried to minimize casualties. The humans simply attacked with overwhelming force and absolute determination. They showed no interest in the raiders' weapons, their cargo, or their reasons for being there. Their only concern seemed to be ending the threat to civilians as quickly and decisively as possible. Within 30 minutes of their arrival, the human fleet had disabled or destroyed 8 of the 11 Korthak ships. The remaining 3 were desperately trying to flee, but human pursuit craft were already moving to intercept them. There would be no escape, no regrouping for future raids, no spreading word of the easy target they had found. On the surface, human marines were already securing the colony, moving with practiced efficiency to locate and free the captured Zalani. Their equipment was advanced, their coordination flawless, and their treatment of the civilians was careful and respectful. Elder Marintok emerged from the tunnels with the hidden children to find armored humans establishing a protective perimeter around the colony. One of them, a tall woman with commander's insignia, approached him with careful, non-threatening movements. "Elder Marintok, I'm Commander Chen of the Earth vessel Prometheus. Are you and your people safe?" The elderly Zalani looked around at the burning wreckage of the raider ships, the efficiently deployed human forces, and the careful way they were treating his people. "You came," he said simply. "You actually came." "Captain Martinez sends his regards," Chen replied with a slight smile. "He said to tell you that humans keep their promises." As the immediate crisis passed, Marintok began to understand that something significant had just occurred. The humans hadn't sent a relief team or a diplomatic mission. They had sent a war fleet, and they had used it without hesitation to protect a small colony of peaceful aliens they barely knew. Word of the human response began spreading through local communication networks, carried by the few Korthak survivors who had managed to escape. The story they told was barely believable. Humans who appeared like ghosts, fought like demons and showed no mercy to those who threatened civilians. Most importantly, they had traveled across 3 sectors in less than a day to honor a promise made by a single cargo ship captain. The Galactic Council's relief fleet was still 2 days away when they received the update from Kepler 438b. The crisis was over. The raiders had been eliminated or driven off. The civilians were safe. And somehow, impossibly, the newest members of the Council had accomplished in hours what everyone else had assumed would take days or weeks to organize. Commander Thektar stared at the reports in disbelief. They sent a battle fleet? For a humanitarian mission? Apparently so, sir. Admiral Harrison's report indicates that they considered the systematic targeting of civilians to constitute an act of war requiring immediate military response. Thektar shook his head slowly. He was beginning to understand that the Council might have seriously underestimated what humanity brought to their alliance. Most species thought in terms of measured responses, diplomatic protocols, and careful consideration of consequences. The humans, it seemed, thought in terms of promises made and promises kept, regardless of the cost. News of the Kepler 438b incident spread through the galaxy faster than most governments could control it. Within a week, every major news network was running stories about the human fleet that had appeared like an avenging force to protect a small alien colony. The details varied depending on who was telling the story, but certain facts remained consistent across all accounts. The humans had deployed a full battle fleet for what should have been a humanitarian mission. They had traveled farther and faster than anyone thought possible. They had shown no interest in negotiation or compromise when civilians were threatened. And they had done it all to honor a promise made by a single ship captain 5 years earlier. In the halls of the Galactic Council, the reaction was mixed. Some members were impressed by humanity's rapid response and effectiveness. Others were deeply concerned about the implications of a species that would deploy overwhelming military force with such apparent ease. Council member Zendara of the Altarian Collective was among the most vocal critics. This sets a dangerous precedent, she argued during an emergency session. Military intervention without council authorization, without diplomatic channels, without even attempting peaceful resolution. What happens when humanity decides our decisions are too slow for their liking? High Counselor Valek, a wise cetacean whose species had helped found the Council 3 centuries earlier, listened to the debates with growing interest. Tell me, Zendara, what would your people have done in the same situation? We would have followed proper protocols. Diplomatic contact, threat assessment, graduated response, minimal force deployment, the responsible approach. And how long would that have taken? Zendara's gill slits fluttered with irritation. Perhaps a week, possibly 2. But we would have resolved it without unnecessary violence. In 2 weeks, how many Zalani younglings would have remained on Kepler 438b? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Zendara had no good answer, because everyone knew the truth. The Korthak would have completed their operation and vanished into the outer systems within days. The Council's careful, measured response would have arrived to find an empty colony and a trail too cold to follow. Meanwhile, the Korthak were discovering that their problems had only just begun. The 3 ships that escaped the human assault limped into the pirate haven of Tortuga Station, expecting to find sympathy and support. Instead, they found themselves treated like plague carriers. "You attacked who?" demanded Station Master Korvik, a massive Ursine whose scarred hide spoke of countless battles. "Humans! Are you completely insane?" Captain Grekhar, his ship barely held together by emergency repairs, tried to explain. They were just supposed to be soft council members, peaceful merchants, maybe a few security guards. How were we supposed to know they'd send a war fleet? "Because anyone with half a brain knows you don't mess with humans," Korvik roared. "They're death worlders, you idiot." Their entire species evolved by fighting everything that moved on a planet that was actively trying to kill them. But they're council members now, Grekhar protested weakly. Civilized. Korvik's laugh was harsh and bitter. Civilized doesn't mean defanged. It means they follow rules until someone breaks them first, and you broke them. The station master was already making calculations. Tortuga Station survived because it maintained a careful balance with legitimate governments. They harbored pirates and smugglers, but they had unwritten rules about what kind of heat they could afford to attract. Attacking council civilians was bad enough, but attacking humans was potentially catastrophic. You need to leave, Korvik said finally. Now, before they track you here. They can't track us. We jumped through 6 different systems. Human ships tracked you through hyperspace during the battle, Korvik pointed out. You think they stopped tracking when you ran? Get out of my station before you bring their fleet down on all of us. Grekhar's protests were cut short by alarms blaring throughout the station. The sensor operator's voice crackled over the intercom. Unknown ships dropping out of hyperspace. Configuration suggests human military vessels. Through the station's viewports, they could see 3 sleek destroyers materializing in the distance, their hulls bearing the distinctive markings of the human space navy. They weren't attacking, but their weapons were clearly powered and ready. A new voice filled the communication channels, calm and professional. Tortuga Station. This is Captain Rodriguez of the HSN Retribution. We are pursuing Korthak raiders responsible for attacks on council civilians. Surrender the vessels Bloodfang, Scar Runner, and Death's Edge for prosecution under interspecies law, and we will depart peacefully. Station Master Korvik didn't hesitate. Human vessels, the ships you seek are in docking bays 7, 12, and 15. We are transmitting their exact coordinates now. Tortuga Station claims no protection over vessels engaged in attacks on civilians. The betrayal was swift and absolute. Within minutes, human boarding parties had secured all 3 Korthak ships. The raiders who had terrorized peaceful colonies for years found themselves in high-security detention cells aboard ships that felt more like flying fortresses than transports. Captain Grekhar, now stripped of his weapons and rank, faced Captain Rodriguez across an interrogation table. The human officer was younger than he had expected, with tired eyes that seemed to see right through him. "You're wondering why we came after you," Rodriguez said without preamble. 3 ships, barely a dozen survivors, fled across 6 systems. Hardly seems worth the effort. Grekhar said nothing, but his confusion was obvious. "The Zelani have a saying," Rodriguez continued. "Translated roughly, it means, the safety of one child is the safety of all children. They believe that any threat to their young is a threat to their entire species' future. So we agree with them. Those younglings you tried to take, some of them were orphans from the plague outbreak our medical supplies helped stop. Children who only existed because humans and Zelani worked together to save lives." Rodriguez leaned forward. "You tried to steal children whose lives we had helped preserve. That makes it personal." The interrogation continued, but Grekhar was beginning to understand that he wasn't just facing prosecution for raiding. The humans were treating this as something much more serious, something that touched on their deepest values about protecting the innocent. Back on Earth, Admiral Harrison was facing his own interrogation, though this one was considerably more polite. The council had requested a full briefing on the incident, and Harrison found himself standing before a panel of alien officials who seemed alternately impressed and concerned by humanity's actions. "Admiral," asked Counselor Thektar, "help us understand your decision-making process. When you received the distress call, why did you immediately deploy maximum force rather than attempting diplomatic contact?" Harrison had been preparing for this question. "Counselor, the distress call made it clear that civilians were under immediate threat, with specific targeting of children. In human military doctrine, Threats to non-combatants, particularly young ones, constitute an emergency requiring immediate response. But surely investigation and negotiation should precede military action. Investigation confirmed the threat was real and ongoing. As for negotiation, Harrison paused, choosing his words carefully. Counselors, imagine someone broke into your home and was threatening your family. Would your first instinct be to negotiate or to eliminate the threat? The question clearly resonated with several council members, though others still looked skeptical. Furthermore, Harrison continued, the Korthak had already demonstrated their intentions through their actions. They weren't making demands or seeking some kind of resolution. They were conducting a systematic operation to kidnap children for slavery. There was nothing to negotiate. High Counselor Valek spoke for the first time during the session. Admiral, there are some who suggest that humanity's response was disproportionate. Your thoughts? Harrison's expression hardened slightly. Disproportionate to what, Counselor? To the threat level. Our response eliminated the immediate danger to civilians in minimal time, with minimal casualties. To the resources expended. The Third Fleet returned to duty the next day, completely operational. To the diplomatic implications, we followed all relevant laws regarding the protection of civilians and the pursuit of criminals across interspecies boundaries. But you deployed a fleet capable of leveling planets to rescue a single colony. Yes, sir, and we'd do it again. The simple certainty in Harrison's voice seemed to settle something for the council members. This wasn't bravado or aggression. It was a fundamental statement about human values and priorities. As the formal hearings concluded, informal conversations began taking place throughout council space. Species representatives who had initially been concerned about human military capabilities were beginning to see them in a different light. The Vraxians, who had suffered repeated raids from the same Korthak clans, were particularly interested. Ambassador Telvac requested a private meeting with Harrison to discuss mutual security concerns. Admiral, my people have been dealing with Korthak raids for decades. We file complaints, impose sanctions, occasionally send patrol ships to investigate. The raids continue because the cost of getting caught is minimal compared to the profits involved. Harrison nodded. That seems to be changing. Tortuga Station's cooperation suggests that the criminal community is reassessing the risk-reward ratio of attacking council civilians. Exactly. The word spreading through the underworld is that humans don't just pursue criminals, you eliminate them completely. No negotiation, no reduced sentences, no political complications. Is this accurate? When civilians are threatened? Yes. Telvac's skin flickered with patterns of satisfaction. My government would be very interested in discussing expanded cooperation in anti-piracy operations. It seems your methods are considerably more effective than traditional approaches. Similar conversations were happening throughout council space. Species that had considered humans to be enthusiastic but inexperienced newcomers were rapidly revising their assessments. The efficiency and determination displayed at Kepler 438b suggested that humanity brought something unique to the galactic community: the willingness and ability to project overwhelming force in defense of shared values. On Kepler 438b itself, reconstruction was proceeding rapidly. The human fleet had remained in system for 3 days, providing security while relief supplies arrived from across council space. Elder Marintok watched human engineers working alongside Zalani technicians to repair damaged infrastructure, their cooperation smooth and natural despite the species' differences. Elder, one of his assistants, approached carefully. The human admiral wishes to speak with you before their fleet departs. Admiral Harrison found Marintok in the Memorial Garden, where the colony honored its dead. The recent attack had added new names to the memorial, though far fewer than would have been the case without human intervention. Admiral, Marintok said without turning around, I find myself struggling with a question. What question, Elder? Your people traveled 3 sectors, deployed a war fleet, and risked diplomatic complications to help strangers. All because one of your ship captains made a promise 5 years ago. Why? Harrison considered the question seriously. Elder, humans have a saying, a promise made is a debt unpaid. Captain Martinez gave you his word that humanity would remember your kindness. Breaking that word would diminish all of us. But surely there were more practical considerations. Economic factors, strategic advantages, political calculations. There were arguments against intervention, Harrison admitted. The distance, the resources required, the potential diplomatic complications. But none of that mattered once we understood that children were in danger. Marintok finally turned to face the human admiral. Your species is either very noble or very dangerous. We're both, Harrison replied honestly. The question is how we choose to use those qualities. As the human fleet prepared to depart, word of their actions continued spreading. The story of Kepler 438b was becoming legend, but it was also becoming something more practical, a deterrent. Pirate clans throughout the outer systems were discovering that attacking Council civilians now carried the very real risk of attracting human attention. The implications extended far beyond simple law enforcement. Humanity's willingness to deploy overwhelming force in defense of civilians was reshaping how other species viewed their place in the galactic community. Some found it reassuring, others found it terrifying. All found it impossible to ignore. In the depths of space, patrol routes were being adjusted, security protocols were being updated, and strategic assessments were being rewritten. The galaxy was slowly coming to terms with the fact that its newest members possessed not just advanced technology and capable ships, but something perhaps more significant, the absolute conviction that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. 3 months after the Kepler 438b incident, the galaxy was discovering that humanity's response had triggered changes no one had anticipated. The rescue of the Zalani colony had become more than just a successful humanitarian mission. It had become a catalyst for a fundamental shift in how interspecies relations were conducted. Captain Elena Vasquez of the cargo vessel Wandering Star was experiencing this shift firsthand as she approached the Rigel trading station. Her ship carried standard commercial cargo, but her escort was anything but standard. 3 Altarian patrol ships flanked her vessel, their crews maintaining constant communication and providing security that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. "Captain Vasquez," came the voice of Squadron Leader Kemtar. "We're detecting some unusual traffic patterns near the station. Nothing threatening, but we're adjusting our approach vector as a precaution." The Altarians had been among the most vocal critics of human military intervention, but their attitude had shifted dramatically after 3 separate pirate attacks on their commercial vessels had been thwarted by human patrols. It turned out that having humans in the neighborhood was remarkably effective at discouraging criminal activity. "Understood, Squadron Leader. We appreciate the escort," Vasquez replied. 6 months ago, she would have been traveling this route alone, hoping to avoid attention from raiders. Now, human merchant ships were actively sought out as escort partners by species who had discovered that pirates avoided human-protected convoys entirely. The change wasn't limited to commercial shipping. Across Council space, requests for human security assistance had increased by over 300%. Species that had previously handled their own defense were quietly asking whether human patrol routes could be expanded to include their systems. On the Council homeworld of Nexus Prime, High Counselor Valak was reviewing these requests with growing amazement. The stack of formal applications for human military cooperation had grown so large that they required a separate committee just to process them. Counselor, his aide, a young Vraxian named Selton, entered with yet another batch of documents. We're receiving reports from the Outer Rim territories. Crime rates in systems with regular human patrols have dropped by 60% in just 3 months. Valak wasn't surprised. The word had spread throughout the criminal underworld with remarkable speed. Humans didn't negotiate with those who threatened civilians, they didn't accept bribes or ransoms, and they pursued criminals across multiple sectors if necessary. More importantly, they had the ships and the will to back up their policies. "What's our assessment of human fleet capabilities?" Valak asked. "Still incomplete, sir. Their response to Kepler 438b demonstrated that they can deploy significant force almost anywhere in Council space within 24 hours. But intelligence suggests that was only a fraction of their actual fleet strength." Valak nodded thoughtfully. The humans had been remarkably open about most of their activities, but their total military capabilities remained somewhat mysterious. What was clear was that they had ships, lots of them, and crews trained to use them with devastating effectiveness. "Sir," Selton continued, "there's something else. We're getting reports of policy changes in several non-council species. The Hegemony, the Dominion Alliance, even the neutral zones. They're all implementing new restrictions on activities near human-protected space." "What kind of restrictions?" "Prohibitions on slave trading, enhanced penalties for attacks on civilian targets, improved security for merchant vessels. It seems that humanity's response to the Korthak has convinced several governments that certain activities are no longer worth the risk." This was perhaps the most unexpected consequence of the Kepler 438b incident. Species that weren't even part of the Council were changing their policies based on a single human military action. The message had been received loud and clear. Humans would cross political boundaries, ignore diplomatic protocols, and deploy overwhelming force to protect civilians. And they had the capability to make good on that threat. Meanwhile, on Earth, Admiral Harrison was dealing with his own unexpected consequences. The success of the Third Fleet's intervention had led to a massive expansion of human space operations. New ships were being commissioned, patrol routes were being extended, and military cooperation agreements were being signed faster than the diplomatic corps could process them. "Admiral," Admiral Chen entered his office with a datapad full of updates. "We have a situation developing in the Corvus sector. The Makari colony ship Hopeful Journey has gone missing near the Badlands. Last transmission indicated they were being pursued by unknown vessels." Harrison looked up from his own stack of reports. The Makari were a peaceful species, known for their skill in terraforming barren worlds. Their colony ships carried entire families, including thousands of young Makari, who would eventually transform dead worlds into garden paradises. "How long since their last transmission?" 18 hours. Their planned route would take them through an area known for syndicate activity. The syndicate was a loose confederation of criminal organizations that had grown bolder in recent months, despite the overall reduction in piracy. Intelligence suggested they were testing human response times and capabilities, probing for weaknesses in the expanded patrol network. "Prep the Fifth Fleet," Harrison ordered without hesitation. "Full deployment, maximum speed, and send a message to the Syndicate's known bases. Any harm to Makari civilians will result in immediate military retaliation." "Sir, the Corvus sector is outside our normal patrol area. We don't have specific agreements with the Makari government." Harrison's expression was grim but determined. "Admiral, 6 months ago, we didn't have agreements with the Zalani either. Some things don't require paperwork." The Fifth Fleet's deployment to the Corvus sector took 14 hours, but by the time they arrived, the situation had already escalated. The Makari colony ship had been captured by Syndicate forces and was being held at a hidden base in an asteroid field. Intelligence reports indicated that the Syndicate was planning to auction off the Makari colonists as slave labor, with the younglings being sold to the highest bidders. Captain Rodriguez, now commanding the destroyer Retribution as part of the Fifth Fleet, studied the tactical situation with cold efficiency. The Syndicate base was heavily fortified, protected by automated defense systems and a fleet of armed ships. In previous decades, this kind of operation would have required months of planning, diplomatic negotiations, and careful consideration of political ramifications. "Captain," his tactical officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the base. They're demanding safe passage out of the system in exchange for releasing half the Makari civilians." "Half?" Rodriguez's voice was flat with disgust. "What about the other half?" "They claim they need compensation for their expenses and are requesting payment of 50 million credits for the remaining colonists." Rodriguez didn't even consider the offer. "Signal the fleet. All ships. Begin attack run. Target their defense systems first, then their ships. Any vessel attempting to flee will be intercepted." The battle for the Syndicate base was swift and decisive. Human ships moved with the same precise coordination they had demonstrated at Kepler 438b, systematically dismantling the criminal operation without regard for the defenders' attempts at negotiation or surrender offers. When Syndicate commanders tried to use Makari civilians as human shields, human boarding parties simply fought their way through the base with such overwhelming force that resistance collapsed within hours. The rescue of the Makari colonists sent another shockwave through the galaxy's criminal organizations. The Syndicate had been considered one of the most powerful criminal enterprises in known space, with resources and connections that had allowed them to operate with virtual impunity for decades. Seeing them crushed so completely by human forces in a matter of hours drove home a sobering reality. Nowhere was safe for those who threatened civilians. But the implications extended far beyond criminal deterrence. The Makari rescue had demonstrated that humans weren't limiting their protective efforts to council members or allied species. They were apparently willing to intervene anywhere, anytime, whenever civilians were threatened by criminal activity. Ambassador Zendara of the Altarian Collective found herself in the unusual position of defending human actions before a gathering of non-council species leaders. The emergency session had been called by nervous governments who were trying to understand the implications of humanity's expanding sphere of operations. "The humans have moved beyond their original mandate," complained Supreme Leader Thakvor of the Hegemony. "First they rescue council civilians, then they protect commercial shipping. Now they're intervening in affairs throughout the outer systems. Where does it end?" Zendara, who had once been among humanity's harshest critics, found herself taking an unexpected position. "It ends where civilian safety ends. The humans have been remarkably consistent in their criteria for intervention. They protect non-combatants, they pursue criminals who target civilians, and they honor their commitments. These are hardly unreasonable standards. But they do so with overwhelming military force, without consulting local authorities, without regard for established diplomatic protocols." "And they get results," Zendara replied simply. "Supreme Leader, when was the last time the Hegemony lost a civilian transport to pirate attack?" Thakvor's silence was answer enough. Like every other government in the region, the Hegemony had benefited from the dramatic reduction in piracy that followed human intervention. Criminal organizations that had operated with virtual impunity for decades were either changing their methods or finding themselves eliminated entirely. "The question," Zendara continued, "is not whether human intervention is justified. The question is whether we're comfortable living in a galaxy where threatening civilians carries real consequences." Back on Earth, the political and military leadership was grappling with the same questions from a different perspective. The success of their interventions had created a situation where human military forces were becoming the de facto protectors of civilian shipping throughout much of known space. It was a role they had never sought, but one that seemed to fit naturally with human values and capabilities. "We're at a crossroads," President Martinez told the assembled Joint Chiefs. "We can continue reactive interventions, responding to crises as they occur, or we can take a more proactive approach to civilian protection throughout the galaxy." Admiral Harrison leaned forward. "Madam President, Our current approach is already having significant effects. Piracy rates are down galaxy-wide. Civilian shipping is more secure than it's been in decades, and criminal organizations are being forced to change their operational methods. We're making a difference. But it's not sustainable in the long term, Defense Secretary Williams pointed out. We're operating at nearly maximum deployment levels just to maintain our current response capabilities. And every successful intervention generates more requests for assistance. The President nodded thoughtfully. What would a proactive approach look like? Permanent patrol routes throughout the galaxy, dedicated rapid response fleets, formal agreements with both Council and non-Council species for civilian protection, Harrison replied. Essentially, we become the galaxy's police force. It was a massive undertaking, but as the discussion continued, it became clear that humanity was already most of the way there. Their ships were faster than most others, their crews were more aggressive in pursuing criminals, and their willingness to use overwhelming force had proven remarkably effective at deterring criminal activity. 6 months after the Kepler 438b incident, Elder Marintok received an unexpected visitor, Captain Martinez. The cargo ship captain, whose promise had started everything, arrived at the Zalani colony aboard a new vessel, the merchant cruiser Promise Keeper. Captain, Marintok greeted his old friend, I see you have a new ship. Martinez smiled. The Merchant Marine Association decided that ships carrying humanitarian supplies should be better protected. This one has shields, weapons, and a direct link to Fleet Command. They walked together through the rebuilt colony, past the memorial garden where new flowers bloomed around the monuments to those lost in the raid. The scars were still visible, but the colony was thriving again, its population actually larger than before the attack, as other Zalani had moved there, seeking the security of human protection. Captain, I must ask you something, Marintok said as they reached the garden. Did you know what would happen when you made your promise to us? Martinez considered the question seriously. I knew that humans keep their promises. I didn't know it would change the galaxy. And it had changed the galaxy. Criminal organizations throughout known space were discovering that their old tactics no longer worked. Species that had never cooperated before were working together under human protection. Trade routes that had been dangerous for decades were now safe enough for unescorted civilian transport. Most importantly, the idea that civilians could be targeted with impunity, that the weak could be preyed upon without consequence, had been thoroughly disproven. Humanity had established a new principle in galactic relations. There would always be someone willing to fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. As Captain Martinez and Elder Marintok stood in the memorial garden, watching Zalani younglings play safely among the flowers, both understood that they were witnesses to something historic. A single promise made in good faith had become the foundation for a safer, more just galaxy. The word had spread to the furthest reaches of known space. Earth's children had grown up, and they were keeping their promises.